Recording. All right. Let's admit all. Ready or not?
Breath.
All right, y'all. Welcome in to a special call today with stems from Public Policy Talks. My name is Marquis Tate, president of Advancing Black Businesses Foundation. We're going to have a great conversation today. This conversation started, everyone. It started only a couple of days ago. We're having a big event on August the 3rd that I'll mention at the latter part of this. And I called Mr. John William Templeton about the National Black Business Month, which we'll be talking about the official name of the National Black Business Month. You're going to hear from John William Templeton. He mentioned about doing an event on today. This day, July 9th, is the anniversary for the ratification of the 14th Amendment, everyone. That's been a major conversation over the last many days due to the ruling just a few days ago on the birthright citizenship from the White House, from the president. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about it from a historical standpoint. We're going to hear from an expert on that wrote a book about it. That's John William Templeton. But before we get kicked off, again, this conversation stemmed from just a conversation a few days ago. We met with the United States Black Chambers on yesterday. We met with Melvin Coleman, President and CEO of the Atlanta Black Chambers, who will be on shortly. And we thought that we needed to have a true conversation. Public Policy Talks, as everyone may know, the ones who are on Public Policy Talks frequently, is on break. But we had to come off break to have this conversation on this special day, everyone. So again, we have Mr. John Williams Templeton on. Let's say I'm just looking through the list. I don't want to forget anyone that helped organize this event. Melvin Coleman, U.S. Black Chambers leadership we talked with yesterday, Chairman Charles O'Neill, and the program manager Philip Dunn of the United States Black Chambers. They may be on shortly, but thank you so much, everyone, for support of this call event I call that came about. Really, it came about, John, you would say yesterday. There's several posts. We're going to put a few links in the chat, and I see our co-host is here, also Melvin Coleman. Thank you for joining us, Melvin. Thank you for your support and getting the information out early this morning. But I'm going to read a few things about to set the tone of what's going on, and this is the Atlanta version, because Mr. John William Templeton is going to be going around the nation holding events just like this in other cities. John, I want to say this kicks off the first conversation. Is that right? With this being the anniversary of the 14th?
I'll just cover that a little later.
Okay, got it. All right, all right. Let me stay in my lane, John. Let me get this thing kicked off. So Atlanta is under siege, everyone. This is the anniversary for the 14th Amendment ratification. We have John William Templeton, the expert on the 14th Amendment, teams with Advancing Black Businesses, Atlanta Black Chambers. We have support of the Texas Association of African American Chambers of Commerce and the U.S. Black Chambers for this special session of African American National Summer School, everyone, to mark the anniversary of the ratification of the 14th Amendment. The greatest political accomplishment of African Americans and the biggest advance in democracy globally. Author of the Citizenship for All, the 150th anniversary of the 14th Amendment, and bicentennial speaker for Frederick Douglass's birthday, Mr. John William Templeton will give us the tools to defend against Jim Crow 2.0 and the Reed hearing used to undermine our victories, everyone. Atlanta, the richest black metropolis globally, is ground zero for direct attacks, which are similar to the New Orleans massacre on July 30th, 1866, which led to the 14th Amendment. He'll describe how to replicate the United Front, which achieved the most rapid constitutional change in history, particularly among the 4.4 million Black-owned businesses nationally whose livelihood depends on the implementation. Listen up, y'all, the implementation of the 14th Amendment. He'll also preview the 23rd Journal of Black Innovation, National Black Business Month. A lot of us have heard about National Black Business Month, but the trademark name is the Journal of Black Innovation National Black Business Month. And that's going to be kicked off with a series of events that we're going to talk about at the latter part, July 30th to actually September 22nd. So they're going to be events. We're going to hopefully be able to share our screen for that. But give you some historical context. The 14th Amendment was proposed by Congress on June 13th, 1866. It was ratified on today in 1868. So that's July 9th, 1868. The amendment was primarily intended to overturn the effects of the Supreme Court decision of the Dred Scott decision, which is Dred Scott v. Sanford. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about that just shortly, which had held people that were enslaved, whether free or not, during Reconstruction. Today, the 14th Amendment remains one of the most significant constitutional amendments and forms a basis for landmark Supreme Court decision involving civil rights, equal protection, due process, and the birthright citizenship. So, to give you a summary of that Dred Scott decision, it was one of the most controversial rulings in U.S. history decided by the Supreme Court. Now, this was on March 6, 1857. It deepened the national divide over slavery and is widely regarded as a major factor leading to the Civil War. So, I'll give you a little background also. Dred Scott was an enslaved man owned by Dr. John Emerson, a U.S. Army surgeon, because Emerson's military assignments, Scott lived in several years in the free state of Illinois, the free state of the free Wisconsin territory at the time, where slavery was prohibited under the Missouri Compromise. After returning to Missouri, Scott sued for his freedom, arguing that because he had lived in free jurisdictions, he should legally be free. So that Supreme Court decision was a 7-2 decision. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney wrote a majority opinion. The court ruled against Scott on several grounds. Some of those grounds, Black people were not U.S. citizens. The court held that Black people of African descent at that time, whether enslaved or free, were not intended to be included as citizens under the Constitution as originally understood, because the court concluded Scott was not a citizen. It said he had no standing to sue in federal court. So Congress could not prohibit slavery in territories. The court declared that Congress lacked the constitutional authority to ban slavery, listen to this, in the U.S. territories. This officially struck down the Missouri Compromise, which had prohibited slavery in certain Western territories. Enslaved people were treated as property. The court reasoned that enslaved people were legally property and preventing slaveholders for talking enslaved people into federal territories would violate constitutional protection. Why this decision is so significant: the ruling denied citizenship for Black Americans. It invalidated a major congressional compromise on slavery, and it expanded legal protections for slavery, intensified tensions between free and slave states, weakened confidence at the Supreme Court could resolve the nation's conflict over slavery. So, how the decision, I'm getting to you, John, I'm going to bring you up, how the decision was overturned after the civil rights, we're in this time frame. After the Civil War, Congress and the states adopted constitutional amendments that directly rejected the legal foundations of Dred Scott. That's the 13th Amendment in 1865, which of course abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment, ratified on July 9th, 1868, declared that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens. of the United States and the state where they reside. This directly overturned the Dred Scott decision holding that black people could not be U.S. citizens. So we became U.S. citizens in, of course, 1870, the 15th Amendment. And then you have a long-term legacy. So what I want to do now is bring in Mr. John William Templeton to talk more about, from a historical standpoint and what we should be doing right here in the Atlanta metropolitan area, everyone. Take it away, John. Thanks a lot for coming on. Appreciate you pushing us on this conversation. We're here to have this conversation today. After John speaks, everyone, just like Public Policy Talks, we're going to be open for a discussion. So get ready. Take it away, John.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John William Templeton. I'm the Dr. Carlton B. Goodlett Distinguished Conservator of the California African American Freedom Trail. And yesterday I got a new name. It's FARCA, the Determined One, after 30 years as being the Wanadu Aru, or the history advisor for the Songhai people. And according to the National Park Service, 75% of today's African Americans come from the Songhai Empire. So we'll deal with that a little later. But happy to talk to you in Atlanta. Atlanta is sacred ground for a number of reasons. But one of the main reasons is that Atlanta is the site of the most important event in African American history. On December 6, 1865, the Georgia legislature ended slavery. So if you ever want to make white folks mad in Atlanta, tell them that the Georgia legislature ended slavery. So it didn't happen in Galveston, it happened in Atlanta. So when slavery ended, it meant that all 4 million African Americans in the country became business people. Doesn't matter whether they were men, women, or children, because they then had to negotiate a new economic agreement. And the Freedmen's Bureau suggested that they come up with work contracts with their former slave masters. But as Marquis just pointed out, according to the Dred Scott decision, a black person had no rights that a white man need to respect. So that meant that contracts meant nothing. So this immediate problem came up where black folks would get into a contract and then they couldn't get paid. And they had no recourse to deal with it. So one of the biggest activities of the Freedmen's Bureau was ironing out these contracts. So in 1866, the Civil Rights Act was passed that gave African Americans the right to enter into contracts. But even that wasn't enough because some of the states passed black codes, which tried to reimpose the Dred Scott decision. So 2 big events happened in the spring and summer of 1866. May 1st through the 3rd, you had the Memphis riots, where dozens of African Americans were killed by the police in Memphis because some of the former Union soldiers were going into business, and the police decided to harass them, so it became a 3-day riot. And then on July 30th, 1866, there were 25 former members of the Corps d'Afrique. Corps d'Afrique was the largest military organization of African Americans, 19 regiments of former slaves from Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. And they were organized to help Grant win at Vicksburg and they were the ones who actually occupied the Mississippi River. So 25 of them were having a meeting on July 30th to have the Louisiana Constitutional Convention to change the new Louisiana Constitution so that African Americans could vote. So a former Confederate general who had become the New Orleans sheriff and the former Confederate mayor organized a group, and they actually surrounded them and killed 238 African Americans who were having a constitutional convention. So this is one of the biggest instances of police brutality in the country. So because of these two events, the entire country was revolted, and this led to a victory and a majority of members of Congress who believed in Reconstruction and putting strict provisions on the former Confederacy so they couldn't go back to those old ways. So this new majority created the Joint Reconstruction Committee. Joint Reconstruction Committee was the first committee to take testimony from African Americans. So they went and did field hearings in all 11 states. So for all 11 states, there's a volume of the testimony that they received. And African Americans talked about the organized violence that they were facing while they were exercising their rights to vote, their rights to be in business, their rights to engage in all kinds of free activities. So the Joint Reconstruction Committee followed up on the 13th Amendment and passed the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment is essentially the enforcement for the 13th Amendment, but it also invalidates Dred Scott. So the 14th Amendment is the most important provision of the Constitution because it gives each individual the protection of the federal government for their liberty. And so it has implications beyond its impact for African Americans, but it also has global implications because before 1868, there were no other democracies in the world. Countries are ruled by kings, by queens. And so the 14th Amendment has basically become the template for every government on the planet. Even those that have kings and queens have had to have some kind of blend of the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment was actually drafted by John Mercer Langston, who was one of the first African Americans to get a law degree. And it was proposed at the Equal Rights League in 1864. So it was an amendment that was created by African Americans and the Loyal League, which was a group of 700,000 African Americans who were organized in 1863, had 4,700 chapters, was the ones that petitioned the members of Congress to do this. And the most compelling argument for it were the 209,154 US troops of African descent who decided the Civil War. So the equation is pretty simple. African Americans saved the country. Their grateful fellow countrymen agreed to ensure that they would never have to face slavery again. And so the only three constitutional amendments of the 19th century are the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. The last constitutional amendment before this was done in 1804. The next one doesn't get done until 1916. So over a 120-year period, these are the only three constitutional amendments that are passed. And the three of them pass in 5 years. So put this in context. You might remember the Equal Rights Amendment that was supposed to give rights to women. Got passed through Congress in 1970. It still hasn't made it through the states 60 years later. But these three amendments got through in 5 years. So back in 2007, I was commissioned by the California Historic State Capitol to interpret the California adoption to the 13th Amendment. So it had me come up, and it had been found in a closet. And so it was in a 9-foot high frame, about 4 feet wide, parchment, and every member of the assembly had signed it, including the people who voted against it, right? And they said, well, what's the significance of this? And so I'm like most people, I'm thinking, well, what did California have to do with the Civil War? Civil War's on the East Coast, California's on the West Coast. Why was this a big deal? But I could tell just from the size of it that they thought it was a big deal. And so we found out that California was very critical to the Civil War because it was the gold from California that paid for the Union side. And so from there, I said, well, there's got to be a similar document for every state that ratified the 13th Amendment. So I went to every state that was in the Union then and got the ratification document for the 13th Amendment, and then the 14th Amendment, and then the 15th Amendment. And I got the legislative record for it. So one of the things that's surprising, and this is one of the things that we can bring up in our contemporary discussions, is that everybody who voted for all three of those amendments was a white male. So when people try to rewrite history and say that this is something that is harmful for white males, no, this is something the white males embraced and saw as being in their own best interest, and it has proven to be in their own best interest. But it's also revealing because it tells us the whole process of it. We started the African American National Summer School basically to teach people about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And we started it on the 20th so people could get all the partying and everything out of the way for Juneteenth, because we've been mistakenly told that the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery, which nothing could be further from the truth. And so now we're trying to give you the real story and the real sequence of what happens, because you will see the agency of African Americans to convince their fellow citizens to make these dramatic constitutional changes that are together called the Second American Revolution. My take on it is that it actually completes the First American Revolution, because one of the things that we talked about on the first day of the summer school is that in 1774, the cause for the American Revolution was that England was doing the slave trade, and all 13 colonies in October 1774 did a resolution to prohibit the slave trade, and they prohibited the slave trade throughout the entire American Revolution. So we've been sort of misled and misdirected about what the American Revolution was about. So it's really the 14th Amendment that actually completes the American Revolution. So as we go through the narrative, and the last point I'll make about my search was that in at least 20 of the states, I was the first person to ever ask for this information. So these documents had been sitting there for 150 years, and nobody ever looked at the data because we had been misled about the history. So this is completely unique information, and it's very compelling in terms of debating about what the 14th and 13th and 15th Amendment actually mean. So, how is this significant to us right now? And we chose the theme Atlanta Under Siege because the same thing that happened in Memphis and happened in New Orleans and happened over and over again in 11 volumes of the Joint Reconstruction Committee report is happening now to Atlanta. And if you saw the flyer we sent out the newspaper clipping about the 1906 Atlanta riot. So Atlanta had its own riot that we probably don't talk about enough in 1906. And dozens of African Americans were killed and communities were burned down. So this happened in 2,000 different communities around the country during Jim Crow. And so the 14th Amendment authors are very explicit about what they're prohibiting. They're not prohibiting the discussion of race. In fact, the 5 years of those 3 amendments are the best conversation that we've ever had about race because everybody was involved. They interviewed Jefferson Davis, they interviewed Robert E. Lee. Everybody was on the table, everybody was equal. And because we had that full discussion, we were able to come to some very definite conclusions, and the country flourished because of it. So the history of the 14th Amendment is not to ban people from talking about race, but it is to fully engage all of the various perspectives about it. And so that's what we have to understand by knowing the whole process that we went through, where everybody had a chance to put in their 2 cents worth on where America would go next. So we have to understand how to respond to the arguments, which almost word for word are things that Andrew Johnson was saying in some of his messages. He got impeached for resisting Reconstruction. And so we've already dealt with these arguments over and over again. And we don't need to engage in debates with people about those arguments. All we have to do is be familiar with the debates that have already been had and point to the ways that African Americans countered those arguments in the past and say, this has already been settled, it's in the Constitution, this is what the Constitution means. And so that we can protect the rights that we have right now. Because we don't know about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, many of the gains that we've made in the 20th century are precarious because they've been done on case law as opposed to the Constitution. So you have precedents being changed because of the political makeup of the Supreme Court. And because we don't know the actual legislative history of the amendments, we need to make sure that these cases are decided on the same constitutional principles that were originally done. And so we've been at a disadvantage because not only in grade school, but in law school. One of my close associates is a civil rights lawyer in California, been practicing for almost 50 years. And she said to me, we didn't study the 14th Amendment in law school, which was stunning to me. I mean, so she's asking me as a historian advice about the 14th Amendment. She's a civil rights lawyer, right? So people are getting away with murder in terms of things that they're saying about the 14th Amendment because they know that everybody else doesn't even know what's in it. And so the purpose of our 48 sessions for the African American National Summer School is to actually teach about 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Because if you're a Black business, this is existential for you, right? Because for the first 250 years that Africans were here in the United States, and we start the calendar in 1526, Chicory, South Carolina, where Blacks land and immediately have a revolt and go join the indigenous people and become the Gullah Geechee people. So from 1526 to 1776, only way you could become free was to go into business. And then for another 8 years, until December 6, 1865, the only way you could become free was to go into business. And then when the amendment actually took effect, it transferred everybody into being a business owner. So the reason for the 14th Amendment is for us to be able to conduct business. And this was the argument that African Americans made, particularly those who were organized in trade unions in 1867, 1868. And literally, the Black dock workers threatened to shut down all the ports unless this got passed. And so this is really about African Americans being able to participate fully in the economy. And if we allow these amendments to be reinterpreted, as happened with Plessy versus Ferguson, then it's going to threaten everything that we have gained. And so Atlanta has been the epitome of Black economic achievement. The Black income in Atlanta is bigger than any other city in the world. So any of the cities in Africa, the Caribbean, the Atlanta metropolitan area tops that. So they have intentionally targeted Atlanta, Fulton County. The elected officials come and grab the votes. They got hundreds of FBI analysts who are trying to go through those records and find things. And they're doing everything they can to try to stop the November election where 7 African American women are on the ballot for statewide office because they understand that the current Civil War is going to be decided in Georgia. And so we want to not just have a history lesson, but a present lesson and a future lesson about we don't want to have January 6th on a national basis. We don't want to have Wilmington on a national basis. We don't want to have New Orleans on a national basis. And so African American businesses, as we have discussed every day of the African American National Summer School, have been the funders for every stage of the African American freedom movement. We haven't had any significant victories that were externally funded. Everything that's significant, everything got passed in the law was funded by Black-owned businesses. So what you're doing isn't just a way for you to make money. It is the core of our existence. And if we did nothing else, Black businesses support Black churches. And so you see the size and the scale of our Black churches. That means that we're capable of doing the same thing in many other arenas. So on the August 6th, which is the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, we're going to be calling on the 4.4 million African American businesses to make a commitment to backing the organizations that are on the front line, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, or Win with Black Men, or Black Voters Matter, by just being members. We don't have to do what John Lewis did and walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and get bloody. All we got to do is be members of those organizations. And it is in our selfish interest. So we're not even asking you to do it because it's the right thing. This is your pocketbook that you're defending. And we were able, because of the big turnout that Black folks had in 2018, change the majority in Congress. And this is sort of a continuing thing. Change majority with the first African American voters in 1866. We had a 90% Black turnout in 1866. 500,000 African Americans voted. Grant won by 300,000 votes. And because of that, we got 3 constitutional amendments. In 2018, we changed the makeup of Congress. And specifically, this was something that I did because I did the research on the PPP program. We went from having $500 million going to Black businesses in the first year to getting $16 billion in 2021. So that went to 989,000 Black entrepreneurs. And it was so massive that there was a $9,000 increase in Black median income overall, just because of that and some of the other things that happened, because we had Maxine Waters chairing House Financial Services and 6 other African American committee chairs who were able to steer money. We got $17 billion for HBCUs. I was on a trustee for Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, and we were literally getting ready to go out of business when the pandemic happened. We had our faculty on furlough, that sort of thing, and our total budget was about $13 million. We got $46 million from the federal government in a year's time, just because of voting. So if you ever want to have somebody ask, why should I vote? Have them come talk to me. And I will give them the receipts on the big difference that we made. We had the most successful 5-year period economically from 2020 to 2025 because of the votes that we did in 2018. So, the whole focus of this is to make sure that people understand that this is an election about the future of Black businesses, and we need to make sure that there's another 90% African American turnout in 2026. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
All right. Hey, great conversation, or great information, Mr. Templeton. Everyone, what you just heard is from an expert when it comes to really history in general, when it comes to Black history as it relates to policy, as it relates to, American society. So thanks so much, John, for that great information. We're getting to the time to where we open it up for questions, comments, whether you put it in the chat or you raise your hand. We'll call on you. We have the expert in Black history right here, the founder of the Journal, everyone, because you've heard us talk more about National Black Business Week, but the official name is the Journal of Black Innovation, National Black Business Month. That's National Black Business Month, everyone. And I
Well,
see,
let me talk a little bit about that before we start the questions,
okay.
so we don't run out of time. So, um, so my background, I am the first journalism graduate from the HBCU. Howard started the first journalism program back in '72. I was in the first freshman class, and I graduated in 3 years. So, got mentored by Dr. Carlton B. Goodlett, who was the president of the NNPA and had graduated from Howard and was the second editor of the Hilltop after Zora Neale Hurston. So he came in and got Howard to start a journalism school so the Black press would have trained uh, uh, journalists. And then I went to University of North Carolina for grad school and did my master's in survey research. So, so what I'm trained to do is to analyze data to discern patterns of racial discrimination. And what I've found to be very effective over the last 53 years is to not discuss feelings or opinions or anything like that. I just bring out the data. And people of all different persuasions are, respond to data. And so in 2004, Fred Jordan, who was the chairman of the National Black Chamber of Commerce and somebody who I worked with in 1996 when we opposed the Prop 209, a ban on affirmative action, he said, I don't have any data on Black businesses. I don't, I'm just talking about why they're important, but I don't have any actual information. And the Bush administration at the time was doing the same thing as happening now. They were trying to remove references to African Americans in federal information, so they weren't collecting these census records on Black businesses. So I said, well, the data doesn't exist because they're not collecting it. And he said, well, that's why you got to do it. So I had to myself create the data by going city by city, state by state, looking at the various disparity studies and that sort of thing. I had to create the data on African American businesses, and so we did the first State of Black Business Report, Loaded Dice, in 2004. And then a couple months after that, my younger brother gets killed by police in North Carolina. So at that point, I decide to implement the recommendation of the study, which was to change the brand identity of African American businesses to job creators, as opposed to folks who are just kind of sitting around waiting for a set aside or something like that. And so we are America's domestic job creators. So what we did was created uh, National Black Business Month as a social intervention to change the attitudes which actually block us from being free. My dean, Tony Brown, who died last week. Um, he had on Black Journal, every week, buy black, buy black. And so I asked the question, I said, well, people have been talking about this for 50 years. Why aren't people doing it? And so what we concluded in the study was that they couldn't do it. I mean, the structures had been set up so that you either couldn't find black businesses, you couldn't, they couldn't get access to the products and services that they needed. So it was just, there were so many things that were going on that you couldn't actually do business with them. So we focus on the policy. So we created what we call 10 key factors for Black business success and created a survey of all 50 states where we analyze state policy and local policy and federal policy and then gave them a rating. And so states compete. So if there's a list and it says, well, Georgia is ahead of Maryland, the governor of Maryland is asking these people, wait a minute, how come they're ahead of us? And so by changing the paradigm from us going and begging people to us saying, well, we're evaluating you, we got not only significant progress on the policies, but we also got bipartisanship. And this is one of the points I want to make very clear. Until 2 years ago, support for Black business was completely bipartisan. It was the only thing that you could get both Democrats and Republicans to agree on. And the strongest laws for minority participation were in the Southern Republican states. And one of the things that Charles O'Neill and I have been talking about was that the best program in the country was in Texas, where they monitored contracting by race every quarter for every governmental entity in the state. And that's still the law in Texas. And Texas, lots of years, Texas would spend more money with Black businesses than the federal government. And they've had Republicans for 30 years, and we got letters every year from Greg Abbott and John Cornyn and even the guy that's running for Senate talking about, how beneficial the historically underutilized business program. And so we've been able to document this with our State of Black Business reports for 23 years, so that people can't come back and say, oh, we think Black businesses are detrimental to white people. Wait a minute. We got 20 years you saying letters to the exact opposite. And so what we've been doing is creating a national disparity study so that it you are able to comply with the most recent Supreme Court decision back in 78 and the one in Croson that came in 84 and that sort of thing, so that we have compelling state interest for the existence of Black businesses. And that's why it's very important for us to be very strict about what we're doing during August, because this ain't a celebration, this ain't a holiday.
Right.
You can go party basically just because it's August. You don't need Black Business Month just because they have a party. It's the summer. You're off. Go do your thing. But this is about everybody maintaining the legal basis for you to be a Black business, which is now in jeopardy because we don't, understand and we don't know the 14th Amendment. And so this year we are starting the 23rd Journal of Black Innovation, National Black Business Month. On July 30th, which is the anniversary of the New Orleans massacre, we have a pledge to the martyrs of New Orleans massacre that we have on video. And we're going through September 22nd, which is the anniversary of the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. So all of those 55 days, we're focusing on a specific industry, because what we do is the folks in any particular industry, we call together the trade association and all the chambers and the chapters of those trade associations to compare notes, because we're so siloed that there are people who are very successful in dealing with these issues, but they're all isolated. And so by focusing on an industry per day, we're able to find out who's doing what across the country. And our State of Black Business report covers all 50 states. So we're able to say, well, these are the people in accounting in Connecticut and the people in accounting in Wisconsin. And so these are the people that you should be connecting with to see what their best practices are. But this year, we also have the active participation of the African Union. So also, there are 54 countries in Africa. So every day we'll be focusing on a particular country from Africa. And we're going to have a permanent offices for the Africa Club, which are the African multilateral institutions. And so we'll have a place where we can engage. Now, they just came into the Caribbean 3 years ago, and they put up $5 billion to fund the Caribbean. And so we're creating the environment for the African Union to see us as part of the sixth region of the African Union, so that they can make their development banks available to us, so that we don't have to, bow and scrape for the American banks. And so your registration for that, we actually invested in the African American banks that are publicly traded, because the one we created our 10 plan, the African American Economic Strategy, in 2014. I got together with a group of national organizations, Ron Busby, U.S. Black Chambers, and Michael Grant with the National Bankers, and Jim Winston with the Black-owned broadcasters, and a bunch of other folks. And we had a retreat in Silver Spring, and we looked at the first 6 years of the Obama administration. We said, well, we got a Black president, we didn't get anything out of it. And I said, well, we didn't ask for anything. So we got exactly what we asked for, right? Yeah. And so, and then the Michael Brown situation happened, and you had people in Ferguson, and they had the microphone in front of them, and they were mad, and tear gas going around, and the reporters were asking, well, what do you want? And there's a blank look on her face. It's like, I don't know, I'm just mad, right? And so we created our 10 plan,
right,
so that all African Americans would say, well, this is what we want. This is how we actually get to the promised land that Martin Luther King talked about. So this year is the completion of our 10 plan, and we'll be looking at the progress that we've made. We set some goals in terms of the number of African American businesses that had employees, capital at African American banks, home ownership, and that sort of thing. And so we've proven how to get there, and the legislation's in place with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act, but it's not being implemented. So what we have to do is hone in on the resources that have already been made available. But this sideshow is happening where they are misrepresenting the 14th Amendment and then saying, well, we can't give you what Congress appropriated for you because it hurts white people, which is nothing but further than the truth. So you can register for National Black Business Month for the 55 days. We don't, expect everybody to be there for all 55 days in San Francisco. It is also the opening. When I was there a couple years ago, we talked about the new Black urbanism, institutions that were built by Blacks, financed by Blacks, designed by Blacks, and occupied by Black institutions. So we're creating the Sergeant Johnson National Museum of African American Art, which will be completely owned by African Americans. So we don't have to worry about the government interfering or telling us what to do or anything like that. And so your registration gives you a membership in that. So you can think about the Russell Center and Black Wall Street and the gathering spot all together, then that's what that would be in the 200,000 square feet. And then, but you can also participate virtually as part of your registration, and you get the State of Black Business Report and the Journal of Black Innovation as part of it. And if you are using this data, and so I'll give you the last thing, is that in 2019, folks in Brooklyn and Brownsville became members, and I went and spoke to them, and they asked me to be chairman of their community development corporation. So in the last 6 years, we brought in $22 million. And we've just finished an 11-story building, mixed use, 220 units, all affordable, and 2 stories on the bottom for our headquarters and a bank, bringing an industrial bank up from DC to have a Black-owned bank in there. We're also doing Belmont Corridor, Restaurant Row, so we're just finishing up a new restaurant and a movie theater on the street. And we reduced crime, the steepest reduction in crime in New York City over the last 3 years in that neighborhood. So we've shown that Black businesses solve all of the problems that our neighborhoods have. And
Right.
we've had that opportunity to do that. So we're able to show compelling state interest to be able to make sure that your cities and states continue and actually expand what they're doing to support you, and that we also give you a portal to open up into the 80 countries of the African Union and have a combined budget of about $800 billion that they're spending, and they are very anxious to work with us. And so we're creating a pathway to do that through the 6th region of the African Union. So all those things get opened up to you by registering for the Journal of Black Innovation, National Black Business Month. So
Wonderful. John, I do have that on the screen. I put that in the chat. That's blackbusinessmonth.com. And you can find under Black Business Month at the top of the page. I clicked on the word Black Business Month, and the information John was speaking of, July 30th through September 22nd. That's for the Journal of Black Business Innovation, National Black Business Month. One of the main events, John, if I could point that out on the screen, that's Dr. George Frazier, The Power of Unity for 4.4 million Black businesses. You can register for that event right there. It's going to be in San Francisco, but as John stated, you can participate online and you get the reports and a lot of other information by registering for this conference. I know, Tamara, we had your hand raised. I know your hand is tired right now, but what was your comment or question? Tamara
Yeah,
Johnson Shealy. There you go.
yes. Yes, sir. Good evening. Hey, Marquise. Good evening, sir. Thank you for all the wonderful information. I actually have a couple questions. You mentioned the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. Can you kind of go back to that a bit? Because I think I was a little lost there, because the way the intent of the law, quote unquote, is for those who are descendants of chattel slavery. So when we talk about Black and flat Blackness and race-based policies, I think that's where it gets lost. So I think if you would, could you go back to some of that, sir, if you don't mind?
sure. So African Americans wrote the 14th Amendment, right? They did the political activities to get the 14th Amendment. However, as Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson pointed out in the ruling, at the end of the day, we're still 15% of the population. So we had to get a whole Congress full of white men to vote 2/3 to get each of these constitutional amendments through. And then we had to go to every state government and get those state legislatures of white men to approve it. So the way that the amendments are worded makes them universal in their application because there was no definition for citizenship for anybody prior to the 14th Amendment. Nobody was a citizen of the United States. The reason they had the Civil War was that people were citizens of states. So Robert E. Lee was an officer in the U.S. Army, and when Virginia seceded, he said, well, I'm a citizen of Virginia, so I have to leave the U.S. Army and join the Confederacy. So prior to the 14th Amendment, people were completely at the mercy of state government. So you had a state like Connecticut that banned slavery in 1765 before the Declaration of Independence. You had a state like Georgia, which started out, Oglethorpe said, we don't want to have slavery in Georgia. And then the folks from South Carolina said, oh, hell no, we're going to have slavery down there too, right? And so you were completely at the mercy of states. So the 14th Amendment was specifically done so that there would be equal protection of the law, due process of law, and there are several other provisions that are important. The most important provision of the 14th Amendment, the full faith and credit clause. So our whole economy is based on that. The reason the United States was able to expand across the continent is because of the full faith and credit clause, because the U.S. could borrow money anywhere and people would say, well, the U.S. is going to pay for it. And that was part of the African American influence dynamics that we talk about. And so the genius that we displayed was how do folks who've been in slavery for 247 years have the sophistication to convince the people who had them in slavery, who thought they were property just 5 years earlier, to convince them to vote to end slavery, to make them citizens, and to provide the right to vote. And so we have these specific remedies for what had happened to us, but those remedies also work to the benefit of everybody else. And so let me define this red herring about the Constitution banning race. So what the Constitution bans, and this is why we want to focus on the New Orleans massacre, the Memphis massacre, the Atlanta race riots, Wilmington, and the 2,000 Black communities that got demolished because of organized violence. What it banned was organized racial violence for economic advantage. So there's a threshold that is created by the most voluminous record that's done for any constitutional amendment, which is the Joint Reconstruction Committee. What it is banning is organized violence for economic advantage. So just the consideration of race is not being banned. So that's the thing that we have to be able to counter and be able to say, no, this is what the legislative record, this is what they were banning. And because of that, they followed up with the three anti-Ku Klux Klan acts, which went even more into detail. And in 1870, they created the Department of Justice to enforce the 14th Amendment. So Congress has been very specific about what it is banning, and that's why we have to be familiar with the legislative record, because us having a scholarship program, like the women had there in Atlanta to do VC, that's completely protected by the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment was passed in 1866. 1867, Congress chartered Howard University. So Congress created race-specific things after it did the 14th Amendment, did the Freedmen's Bank, right? So we need to be able to say that, point out that having a program that deals with the impacts of the deprivation that happened, and this is where the protected class, and the proper language is that African Americans are the only constitutionally protected class. And this is the reason why. In 1774, First Continental Congress promises to end the slave trade. 1808, Congress passes a law banning the slave trade. So everybody thinks, okay, slave trade is going to die out, because if you can't trade slaves, there won't be slavery. And then in the 1820s, England and France and all the other European countries abolished slavery in the Caribbean. So you have West Indian emancipation. So, but in 1830, after they conquer Alabama, Mississippi, the Black population goes from 1 million to 4 million. And you wind up going from 300,000 slaves in 1830 to 2.6 million in 30 years. All right, just because of cotton and the cotton gin. So the argument that, oh, it wasn't legal. It had already been banned. Right? And that's what we had to understand. Now, this is a complete violation of not only the law, but the covenants, because the reason that the American side was able to win in the American Revolution is because they convinced the people who were enslaved, who were a third of the population, okay, well, once we defeat the British, then you're going to have your freedom, right? So the Black folks fight along with them, right? The British were coming to them and saying, okay, if you join our side, we'll make you free immediately. Some did, but the majority stuck with the Americans. Same thing happens again in the War of 1812. The U.S. said, okay, well, look, we already passed the ban on slave trade, so just hang with us and, you'll be able to eventually end the slave trade. And so then the Civil War, the U.S. finally lives up to the commitment and ends slavery. And in these three constitutional amendments, it commits that we will no longer have slavery and you will be treated the same as any other citizen. They've never lived up to that commitment. And so we are a protected class because the Constitution prevented us in its first 80 years, when it said with 3/5 of a person, from taxation without representation. So we weren't represented in the government for the first 80 years. And then, as I point out here on the board, all of those 11 Confederate states had to promise to ratify 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments in order to be readmitted to the Union. So those states made a commitment to observe these amendments, and they didn't because of Jim Crow. So once again, you have the covenant that was broken. And so so we have that specific protected status through the Constitution because of the covenants that were made to us, because, and this is why it's so important about our military service, the 5 million African Americans who are veterans, right? 2 million still living today. The reason that whites have agreed to this was because they saw us fight for the country. Crispus Attucks was first to die for the country. And so the gains have always come after wars, where folks said, we know they fought, you know, and so we have to really drill home that African Americans are veterans, because the thing that was compelling about the New Orleans massacre, those folks were Union Army veterans. Same thing with Memphis. And so we need to make sure that we're always talking about our protected status, because we're not individuals. So when white folks say, well, you ought to be treated on your merit, no, we're part of a protected class. We're not considered next to you because you had the opportunity to be represented in the government for the last 250 years. We just got in the last 30 years, right? So we haven't had a say in all of the structures that have been set up. So we're just beginning to get it. And now that we are getting access to the levers of power, you're trying to change the rules. And so that is the basis for our protected status. And we have to make sure that it is because of the violence and the racism against us and not our skin color. And so part of what we'll be doing through the museum is we're doing an exhibit to map all of those 2,000 communities where there was organized violence against African Americans, so that we can have a series of appellations where that whenever you're doing a proposal or something like that, you're defining the compelling state interest based on the impact of a specific act of racism, because that is a standard that's set by the 14th Amendment Joint Reconstruction Committee. It's not, oh, we don't just say, oh, all these people because they have brown skin. It's like, no, they are the victims of a particular atrocity that happened, and we are rectifying that situation. So we all have the ability to point to that. And with the African American National Summer School, we're basically going through that for 48 sessions to kind of show people state by state and city by city where you fit in on that. And we want to get 1 million kids to see that, because next year, because of what the Trump administration is doing, they're not going to have access to Black history in their schools. So we've created a integrated learning system for real, so that they can have access to Black history, and it has the UNESCO General History of Africa and the Caribbean. So we not only have American history, but the African and the Caribbean as well. So we actually have better situation in terms of Black history for them online than they can get in school. So we want to make sure that the kids get access to that as well.
Wow. All right. Just drop the mic, John. Hey, great explanation. I know Henry is in the chat saying it's a powerful perspective. I said next time something goes before the Supreme Court regarding Black America, you should be right there with them, John. So I know
Well,
Tamara.
I've been the behind the scenes. I've been supplying the data to the Urban League and NAACP for the last 30 years. So I got this great letter from Julian Bond back in '98. Uh, where he's expressing his delight at something I wrote. So but so I'm really kind of coming out of the closet, because I like to be in the
Okay.
background, but it's like, no, I got to come out here and be visible now.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you more about that protected class. I never heard of it that way. That
Yeah.
we
We are a
are.
protected class, so
Yeah.
so we would never we should never be compared as an individual to a white man. Just like
Hmm.
you wouldn't compare somebody in a wheelchair to a track runner, right?
Got it. Yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from. No
Yeah.
doubt. I know we
But
had a
but but like I
question.
said, we got to learn the language. So that's why we want people to come and participate in our official sessions, because we don't want you tripping out there. Because what they're doing is they are finding the low hanging fruit, people who don't understand compelling state interest, and they're suing them, and they're winning because they're picking people who don't know what's going on. They won't touch me. I went in and embarrassed Kevin Hassett at the White House last year. So they'll stay away from me. But
Yeah.
if
Hmm.
folks go out there and trip and say, "Oh, I'm doing Black Business Month," and they say, "Why?" Okay, and then they slap you with a lawsuit, and you're like, "Oh."
Yeah. Yep.
so so we
Got
want
it.
to keep people from getting caught up in that and come and find out how. And like I said, we proved it in Brooklyn that um, Brooklyn's the basically the poorest and blackest community in the country, and we got $22 million in there, and people are tripping over themselves to send money. So we can do that anywhere.
All right, great. I know everybody, we didn't have a set time on this, just like we usually an hour for public policy talks. We're going just before 1:30. We're getting off. I know, Tamara, you still have your hand up. Did you have another comment or question?
Yes, sir. Just real quick, Mr. Thank you again for the explanation. One more, just for clarity. In the most simplest terms, would you agree that the 14th Amendment was for specifically for those of us who are descendants of chattel slavery, and African American becomes like I was trying to ask earlier, like black, it becomes vague, not specific at all. But would you agree the 14th Amendment was just for those of us who are descendants of chattel slavery in this country, and the interpretation today mirrors will help benefit the immigrants, not specifically those of us who are descendants?
No, no, I wouldn't agree to that, because, like I said, it created the right of citizenship for everybody. That's why the title of the book is Citizenship for All. That's the genius of it. Um, every advance for Black folks has benefited everybody, and that's the thing we have to be able to tell the people. It's like, because they're basically going on. They literally got folks, buying guns and all that sort of thing, because Black folks gonna take over and they're gonna take everything from you. It's like, what are we taking from white people? What? Nothing. Right? And so we have to really let folks know we're not protesting, we're protecting. We are the ones that created democracy in this country, not white people. If it was up to white people, we wouldn't have a country. Right? We are the ones that tied this thing together. Right?
Right. Hey,
And
John, I know
so
on Clarence Thomas's dissent on the Supreme Court case, 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship. He wrote a 90-page dissent. And in that, and unusually, he talked about race. And,
yes,
Clarence Thomas is usually the worst thing when it comes to race on the
I
Supreme Court
know.
for us. but he actually sided differently and
That's
was
what I'm
saying
saying. Yeah.
that, and he actually cited up several cases during the earlier years, just after the 14th Amendment, that people were denied citizenship because he stated, and I thought, some people say they thought would never agree with him, but he stated that it was strictly for us of Africa, from slavery, the enslaved. That's what the 14th Amendment actually talked about. And he actually has
No,
some background around that.
because in the actual deliberations, they they were going to put a sentence saying it was just for African Americans who had been enslaved. And they took that out, right?
Got it.
So they talked about that, and so they made the language something that applied to everybody. And then the case that came up in 1896. Now, the year after Plessy versus Ferguson, they had the case for the Chinese person from San Francisco and said, well, you're a citizen because you were born in the United States. And so, um, and actually, in fact, the biggest reason why people voted against the 14th Amendment was because people said, well, it's going to apply to the Chinese too. And they said, yeah, it is, And so those issues were decided. And so our position is not setting ourselves apart based on, a characteristic, but the idea that we are a protected class. So,
Mhm.
the African who just migrated 2 years ago, like the guy on the soccer team, he's part of the protected class because when the police stops him, they're not going to ask him if he's African or like me, whether he's been there 10 generations, right? He black, right? And so the protected class is for everybody who is black, because we are subject to that organized violence. It isn't because of our skin color, it's because we are the ones who face that violence.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
John. Hey, we got to be out of here within about 4 minutes. So, really appreciate all the information. Tamara, I'm sorry we're not able to come back to it. We got to get off of this call because we got to take care of a couple of housekeeping things about events that are coming up. So, we do have the August 3rd event. It's in the chat under the blackbusinessmonth.com. Click on Black Business Month at the top. You'll see the events, the 55 days of events going on for the Journal of Black Innovation, National Black Business Month. We do have the DC fly-in for the Atlanta Black Chambers and Advancing Black Businesses. That's September the 16th through the 20th. It's just the heart of the DC fly-in is September 17th through the 20th. That is the DC fly-in. That's the seventh annual DC fly-in during the Congressional Black Caucus Week. Public Policy Talks resumes on this coming Thursday, everyone. We're going to have a continued conversation around this topic, around the 14th Amendment, to be a part of it, but not the entire part. But thank you, each and every one, for staying on an extra 20 some plus minutes. Thank you all for coming on. John, really, really appreciate the conversation we had a couple of days ago. I called John about the month, and John jumped all over me about several things concerning it being the founder of the month, and that's what this. And so here we are, right here, talking about the 14th Amendment on the anniversary date of the 14th Amendment ratification, everyone. So, John, you mentioned August 6th. Also, that's the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
That's on.
And so that whole week we're doing the week of mourning. So on that day we'll have Derek Johnson and some of the leaders of the civil rights organization. So it's basically going to be a telethon for you to become a member of those organizations because the role of black businesses, back during the Birmingham Crusade, black businesses were the ones that put up the bail. They're
Mhm.
going out right
Right.
now and arresting voter organizers and everything. Black businesses going to have to step up this year to make sure that our civil rights organizations, our voting organizations are able to, and our political candidates, to fund our political candidates. We got South Carolina, we got a brother running for governor. Arkansas, we got a brother running for governor. We got 6 African Americans running for Senate. South Dakota, Kansas, Mississippi, Kentucky. So we can double our representation in the Senate, and Black businesses make $360 billion. So for us to put 1% of that into this election is a great investment.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks, John Templeton, for being on. Angela Sims, I hear you out there. Would love to have an in-person public policy discussion at Taste Urban. Let's talk sometime soon, Angela. We'll see. Definitely would love to partner with you and Corey. So thanks a lot for being on, everyone. I know I just saved the chat. I know maybe missing some things in the chat. I know there was a good question, though, John, in the chat, and I got to run. Where's that question? Where's that one question? Yeah, Yolanda said, how do we enforce these protections? Are you able to say that within 30 seconds, John? Or answer that question?
Now, yeah, just like y'all showed up at the Capitol and backed them off from the 4.4 million Black businesses. That's going to scare the hell out of everybody. And that's why we're bringing in George Fraser. That is our protection. For Black businesses to all speak with one voice. That's going to be the end all and be all of this. And that's how we got the 14th Amendment with all the Black dock workers said we're going to shut down all the ports. Right? So we now have more Black businesses than there were people in slavery. So if they were able to get 3 constitutional amendments, they didn't have the internet or anything like that. We got airplanes and all kinds of stuff. So the 4 million of us in business should be able to protect what they got.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Just like Michelle Dawkins said on in the chat, an awesome history lesson today. Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate this history lesson, and you're the expert that I know that I can call and go to and get the right answers about history and how it relates to public policy today. So I really appreciate all the support for everyone. I do see us a couple of chamber presidents out there. Angela Milton, thank you so much. I know Shane from the Northeast Georgia Black Chamber of Commerce was on, and there's several others that were on. So thank you for your support. Everyone, I'll see y'all next week. Public Policy Talks on next Thursday, 8:30 a.m. We're going to have a good conversation.
I'll come back next week, too, if anybody has any questions.
Okay, great. We're definitely going to have a continued conversation or segment about this because I do want to flush out what Tamara Johnson-Shealy was pointing at because he made a good point. But all right, y'all. John, we'll talk soon. Thanks a lot for your support.
Okay.
All right.
All righty, bye-bye.
See y'all. Take it easy, everyone. Thanks for coming on. All right, we're out of here. Let's save this chat one more time. All right. See y'all. Have a good one.